There's a moment when the noise fades, and what's left is shame. Not because you did something wrong, but because you did nothing at all. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand why Carl Jung believed that your undisciplined self isn't lazy. It's exiled, and it's begging to come home. We don't talk about what it does to a person, to watch themselves break the same promise every single day, to say tomorrow, knowing full well tomorrow never comes, to walk past the mirror and feel a strange resentment toward your own reflection, not because you hate yourself, but because you don't believe yourself anymore. You say you'll change. You say you'll begin. You even believe it for a few hours, and then the next morning arrives, and the man who made the vow is gone, replaced by the same tired face, scrolling again, running again, hiding again. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." But what if avoiding discipline is exactly that? Not just procrastination, but a spiritual rejection of your future self. That's where we begin. Because what if I told you the version of you who's tired, unfocused, easily distracted, is not who you are? What if that's just who you've rehearsed? If this is already stirring something inside you, don't just watch, subscribe. Because this channel exists for the parts of you no one else speaks to. You've been trained to think discipline is about effort. But that's not true. Discipline isn't effort, it's identity. And you will never become disciplined until you stop identifying as someone who needs to become it. That may sound strange, but stay with me, because once you understand this, the war you're fighting every morning will begin to make sense. See, Jung believed that most people never become who they are, not because they don't try, but because they remain strangers to their own potential. They chase change like it's something external. A new job, a new environment, a new system, a new motivation video. But the truth is, you don't need more. You need less. Less escape, less noise, less hiding from the one thing you've always feared most. Responsibility. Not responsibility to others, not to your boss, not to your parents, but responsibility to your becoming. The sacred contract between who you are and who you were meant to be. This is where discipline lives, not in checklists, not in 5 a.m. alarms, but in devotion. Think about it. When have you felt most alive? It wasn't during pleasure. It wasn't while resting. It was when you were aligned, when you kept your word, when you surprised yourself by doing what you once thought you couldn't. That feeling wasn't just pride. It was integrity. And Jung would tell you, that's not a coincidence. The psyche wants unity. It wants to integrate. The more fragmented you are, saying one thing, doing another, the more your subconscious will rebel. You'll feel resistance, not because you're lazy, but because your mind is rejecting the fraud of who you're pretending to be. That's what most people miss. Lack of discipline isn't the disease. It's the symptom of a split soul. You've been divided. One half of you makes goals, the other breaks them. One side wants to build, the other wants to disappear. And every day you repeat that cycle, you are not just wasting time, you are deepening the split. Carl Jung warned about this. He believed that what you resist persists, that the parts of yourself you abandon don't die. They wait. They become your shadow. Not just the dark or broken parts, but the disciplined part, the ambitious part, the ruthless, structured, powerful version of you that you've locked away out of fear of failure or fear of your own strength. Yes, your strength. That's what you're actually afraid of, isn't it? Because if you commit to this, if you actually become disciplined, then you'll have no one left to blame. You won't be able to hide behind potential anymore. You'll have to become proof. And that's terrifying. Because once you become proof, you can't escape your destiny anymore. You're either rising or dying, and the world will watch. But here's the truth. You're already dying. Every time you betray your own schedule, every time you abandon your priorities, every time you hit snooze, scroll past your promise, and settle for cheap dopamine instead of earned respect. You don't feel tired because of work. You feel tired because of guilt. Because deep down, you know this isn't who you're meant to be. And I want you to hear this next part clearly. Not from your ears, from your bones. Discipline is not something you add to your life. Discipline is the soul's immune system. It protects you from spiritual decay, from regret, from becoming a man who has everything except himself. Drop a comment when something hits deep. You might help someone else who's still trapped in the part you've already healed. And now, I need you to remember this. There was a time you wanted this, Riley. Before the distractions, before the burnout, before you lost faith in yourself. But your spirit didn't forget. It's been waiting, patiently, silently, for you to return to that sacred fire, to the forge where discipline was once born in you. We'll go there. We'll relight it. But not yet. Not until we uncover the root. Because now we'll descend into the origin of your undisciplined self, where the fracture began, why you resist structure, and how Jung's theory of archetypes reveals the buried identity sabotaging your every effort. This isn't motivation. This is transformation. And once you see it, you'll never return to who you were. You didn't become undisciplined by accident. You were trained, not by one moment, but by thousands of small betrayals, some from the world and some from yourself. And at some point along the line, you began to internalize a story. That you're someone who always almost does it. Someone who nearly changes. Someone with potential that never quite arrives. But that story isn't you. It's a survival mask. One crafted out of fear, rejection, abandonment, and the subtle wounds no one else noticed. And now, years later, that same mask has become your identity. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." So let's make it conscious. Let's go back, not to relive, but to understand. Do you remember the first time discipline was punished in you? Maybe you tried to speak up and were silenced. Maybe you got excited about something and were mocked. Maybe you followed a routine, built something small, took pride in it, only to watch someone tear it down like it was nothing. That's how the fracture begins. Not from laziness, but from pain. And here's the brutal irony. The disciplined part of you, the one who wants structure, control, focus, is also the most vulnerable. Because discipline requires belief. It requires faith in your own power. And when that belief is shattered early, the disciplined self goes into hiding. This is what Jung called the repression of the noble archetype. The king, the warrior, the architect of order and control. The part of your psyche that wants to build empires, lead yourself, master time and energy. It's still there. But it's been created by years of internalized defeat. Instead of standing tall, he now lurks in the shadows, not dead, just unclaimed. So every time you try to start something, a new habit, a morning routine, a clean diet, a focused work sprint, you are not starting from zero. You are confronting every ghost who ever told you you won't follow through. You never finish what you start. You're not the kind of person who can change. And unless you realize this, you'll keep self-sabotaging, not because you want to fail, but because part of you still believes you must. Here's the insight Jung left us. Your outer failures are rarely about effort. They're about identity. You cannot outwork a self-image that contradicts the very thing you're trying to become. You will always return to the man you believe you are, no matter how many systems or tools you try. So how do we change that belief? Not with affirmations, not with hype, but with integration. Let's get deeper. Imagine two men inside you. One wants power, legacy, structure. He is focused, calm, sovereign. He keeps his word, even when no one is watching. The other wants ease, comfort, disappearance. He avoids risk, avoids failure, avoids intensity. He craves warmth, not victory. These two men are not enemies. They are split versions of you. And as long as you reject one, you will never be whole. You must stop trying to kill the lazy version of yourself. You must reclaim him. Speak to him. Ask him, what are you protecting me from? Because I promise you, that lazy part of you isn't trying to ruin your life. He's trying to protect you from pain, from the sting of disappointment, from the memory of being laughed at, abandoned, misunderstood. And when you begin to see this, discipline becomes something sacred. It's no longer a war. It's a return to the throne you abandoned, a return to the center of your psyche, where the king archetype sits, watching, waiting, not to dominate, but to stabilize. Jung knew that every man must eventually meet his inner king. And when he does, he stops performing. He stops chasing permission. He begins to organize his life, not to impress others, but to reflect the inner hierarchy he has finally restored. That's what discipline really is. It's psychological architecture. It's the external reflection of internal order. And when a man lacks it, he doesn't just lose productivity, he loses his identity. This is why undisciplined men feel shame even when no one is watching. Because it's not about what they did or didn't do. It's about who they're afraid they're becoming. The fractured self is a haunted place. And unless you reintegrate the lost archetypes, the builder, the warrior, the father, the guide, you'll keep reaching for motivation that never arrives. Because here's the truth. You were never meant to rely on motivation. You were meant to remember, to awaken, to walk through your day as a man who has already decided, this is who I am. This is what I do. This is the order I bring. And yes, it will be painful. Yes, you'll fail. But failure will no longer define you, because identity precedes behavior. And once your identity changes, your behavior will follow. If you're still here, you already feel it happening. A part of you is waking up, not the hyped up, overachieving part, but the ancient part, the wise, structured, calm, relentless part, the one who doesn't scream. He builds in silence. And now I need you to hear something else. You cannot fully reclaim discipline until you forgive yourself for the years you lost. This isn't about punishment. It's not about regret. It's about maturity. The immature man says, I'm broken. I must be fixed. The mature man says, I am whole. I must be remembered. So remember this. There was never anything wrong with you. You just forgot who you were. And every time you choose structure over chaos, presence over distraction, action over hesitation, you are not becoming someone new. You are returning to the man your younger self needed, the man your older self will thank you for. You see, Jung believed that the greatest work of your life isn't success. It's individuation, becoming whole, becoming real, uniting the fragmented parts of yourself into one living, breathing truth. And discipline, it is the pathway to that truth. It's how you prove to your unconscious that you are safe, that you are in control, that the king has returned to the throne. So I'll leave you with this question. What would your life look like if you stopped living as a reaction and started living as a declaration? Because now we'll complete the journey. We'll talk about time, about death, about the war that continues when you avoid order, and the quiet, unwavering strength that begins when you stop needing to feel ready and start acting like you were born to lead. This isn't about becoming productive. It's about becoming sovereign. And the final transformation is waiting. Time doesn't just pass. It accumulates. Every minute you delay your discipline becomes part of the architecture of your life, not just as a missed opportunity, but as a brick in the structure of regret. You don't just lose time, you become shaped by the loss. Carl Jung once said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." That line should haunt you, not because it's harsh, but because it reveals the most brutal mirror. You don't need to be convinced who you are. You're already proving it every day. And most people don't even notice the moment they drift. They just wake up one day, 10 years later, and realize the man they've become is not the man they admire. He's a version sculpted by delay, by hesitation, by stories that sounded like wisdom, but were really fear in disguise. You were not born lazy. You were trained to mistrust your own power. And you've spent years softening the edge of your ambition, sanding it down so it wouldn't threaten anyone, not even yourself. Because real discipline, it changes the room. It's not loud, but it carries weight. And that weight unsettles people who haven't yet risen. That's why you started hiding. That's why you let go. You wanted to stay close to people who were still sleeping, because waking up meant walking alone. But what if that loneliness was a test? What if your solitude wasn't a punishment, but a passage? You must understand something that most men will never realize until it's too late. Every time you betray your potential to remain comfortable, you are practicing death. Not physical death, but spiritual erosion, the slow fading of fire, the disappearance of will, the quiet resignation of a man who once had hunger in his eyes, but now only has excuses. Carl Jung didn't believe we find meaning by chasing happiness. He believed we find it through confrontation, by looking the dragon in the eyes, the chaos, the failure, the pain, and walking into it with open arms. Discipline is your sword in that confrontation. It doesn't eliminate fear. It gives you something stronger than fear. It gives you direction. You see, every man is disciplined,